The United States is once again at a critical crossroads in its ongoing response to Russia's actions in Ukraine. As the war drags on, American officials are weighing the possibility of imposing a new round of sanctions, measures that could be even more severe than those already in place. These discussions are taking place at the highest levels of government, with policymakers and advisors meeting behind closed doors to debate the best course of action. The proposed sanctions are designed to target key sectors of the Russian economy, including banking, energy, and technology. Officials are considering ways to cut off Russia from vital financial systems, restrict access to advanced technology, and further limit the country's ability to trade with the rest of the world. The goal is to increase the economic pressure on Moscow, making it more difficult for Russia to sustain its military campaign in Ukraine. If enacted, these would be the toughest sanctions yet imposed by the United States and its allies. They could include measures such as freezing Russian assets held abroad, banning more Russian banks from the global financial system, and expanding export controls on critical goods. The hope is that by tightening the economic screws, the US can force Russia to reconsider its aggressive actions. These new sanctions are not just punitive, they are also strategic. The United States wants to bring Russia back to the negotiating table and encourage meaningful peace talks with Ukraine. Diplomats believe that increased economic hardship could push Russian leaders to seek a diplomatic solution, potentially paving the way for a ceasefire or even a lasting peace agreement. The announcement of possible new sanctions has already sent ripples through global markets. Investors are watching closely, as any escalation in economic measures could have far-reaching consequences, not just for Russia, but for the entire world. Energy prices, international trade, and the stability of financial markets all hang in the balance. Major economies are bracing for potential disruptions, and businesses are preparing for new challenges. Meanwhile, the situation on the ground in Ukraine remains dire. Cities continue to suffer from relentless attacks, with civilian infrastructure and homes being destroyed. The humanitarian crisis is deepening, and millions of Ukrainians are still displaced or living under constant threat. Despite international condemnation, Russia shows no signs of halting its military operations. Over the past year, the US and its European allies have already imposed a series of tough sanctions on Russia. These measures have targeted Russian banks, oligarchs, and key industries, aiming to isolate Russia from the global economy. While these actions have inflicted significant economic pain, they have not yet succeeded in bringing an end to the conflict. The impact of sanctions has been felt by ordinary Russians as well. Many have seen prices rise, jobs disappear, and access to goods and services become more limited. Protests against the war and the government's policies have erupted in several cities, but the Kremlin has responded with crackdowns and censorship. Despite the hardships, the Russian government has so far managed to maintain its grip on power. Now, as the US considers even tougher measures, the world is watching to see what impact these new sanctions might have. Will they be enough to change Russia's course, or will they simply deepen the divide between East and West? The coming weeks will be critical, as American leaders weigh their options and the stakes continue to rise for Ukraine, Russia, and the global community. The proposed sanctions are being described as, well, bone-crushing. They would target key sectors of the Russian economy. One proposal is a 500% tariff on imports of Russian oil and gas. This would significantly increase the cost of Russian energy. The sanctions would also target Russian banks and businesses. The goal is to cripple Russia's ability to finance the war in Ukraine. The US hopes these measures will force Russia to negotiate a peaceful resolution. Senator Lindsey Graham has introduced a bill to impose these sanctions. The bill is called the Sanctioning Russia Act of 2025. It has bipartisan support in the Senate. This means both Democrats and Republicans support it. Graham says the bill is designed to support President Trump's efforts to end the war. He believes the sanctions will give Trump more leverage in negotiations with Russia. The bill would require Russia to engage in serious peace talks with Ukraine. In a move that has sparked intense debate both at home and abroad, lawmakers have proposed a staggering 500% tariff on Russian oil and gas imports. This measure, if enacted, would represent one of the most aggressive economic actions taken against Russia in recent history. The intention behind the tariff is clear: to dramatically reduce Russia's revenue from its most lucrative exports, and to send a powerful message about the consequences of its actions on the world stage. Yet this proposal has quickly become the most controversial aspect of the broader sanctions package. Across the country, the idea has ignited passionate responses from politicians, industry leaders, and everyday citizens alike. Some see it as a bold and necessary step, while others warn of unintended consequences that could ripple far beyond Russia's borders. Critics of the tariff argue that it would have a direct and painful impact on American consumers. With energy prices already volatile, they warn that such a steep tariff could send the cost of gasoline, heating, and electricity soaring. Families struggling to pay their bills might find themselves facing even higher expenses, while small businesses could be forced to raise prices or cut jobs to cope with increased costs. The fear is that, in trying to punish Russia, the United States could end up punishing its own people as well. There are also deep concerns about the impact on America's allies, particularly in Europe. Many European countries rely heavily on Russian energy to power their homes and industries. A sudden spike in prices or a disruption in supply could trigger an energy crisis, straining diplomatic relationships and potentially weakening the united front against Russia. Diplomats and energy experts warn that the ripple effects could be felt across the globe, making it harder for allies to maintain their support for tough sanctions. However, supporters of the tariff insist that such bold action is necessary. They argue that the world cannot stand by while Russia continues its aggression in Ukraine. For them, the tariff is not just about economics, it's about taking a moral stand and using every available tool to pressure Russia to change course. They point to the suffering in Ukraine, and say that the cost of inaction would be far greater than any temporary economic pain. Supporters believe that by inflicting significant economic pain on Russia, the international community can force its leaders to reconsider their actions. They hope that the hardship will ultimately lead to meaningful negotiations and eventually, peace. As the debate rages on, one thing is clear. The proposed tariff is more than just a policy. It's a test of values, priorities, and the willingness to bear costs in pursuit of a greater good. The proposed sanctions could have a significant impact on global trade. Russia is a major exporter of oil, gas, and other commodities. The sanctions would disrupt these exports, potentially leading to higher prices and shortages. Countries like China and India, which are major buyers of Russian energy, would be particularly affected. The sanctions could also impact European countries that rely on Russian gas. The US is working with its allies to mitigate the potential economic fallout. In a related development, the United States and Ukraine have signed a new minerals deal. The deal gives the United States privileged access to Ukrainian resources including aluminum, graphite, and natural gas. This deal really strengthens the economic ties between the two countries. The agreement also establishes a Reconstruction Investment Fund for Ukraine. This fund will provide financial assistance to help Ukraine rebuild after the war. The United States is, committed to supporting Ukraine's economic recovery. The proposed sanctions have exposed divisions within the United States government. President Trump has been reluctant to impose new sanctions on Russia. He prefers a negotiated settlement and has avoided direct confrontation with Putin. However, many in Congress, including some members of Trump's own party, believe that tougher measures are needed. They argue that Russia will only respond to strength. The debate over sanctions really reflects the broader debate over United States policy towards Russia. The situation in Ukraine has global implications. The conflict has already strained relations between Russia and the West. The proposed sanctions could, honestly, further escalate tensions. The world is watching closely to see how the situation unfolds. The conflict has also raised concerns about the potential for a wider war. The United States and its NATO allies are providing military aid to Ukraine. However, they have ruled out direct military intervention. The situation remains volatile and unpredictable. The United States now finds itself at a critical crossroads in its relationship with Russia, a moment that could define the trajectory of international relations for years to come. Tensions have been steadily rising, with diplomatic channels strained and trust between the two nations at a historic low. The decisions made in the coming days and weeks will not only shape the future of these two powerful countries, but will also send ripples across the globe, affecting allies, adversaries, and neutral parties alike. As policymakers in Washington deliberate their next moves, the world watches with bated breath, aware that the stakes have rarely been higher. The proposed sanctions, which are among the most severe ever considered, represent a significant escalation of pressure on Moscow. These measures are designed to target key sectors of the Russian economy, from banking and energy to technology and defense. The intent is clear: to compel Russia to reconsider its actions and return to the negotiating table. However, such sweeping sanctions also carry risks, including potential retaliation and unintended consequences for global markets. Russian officials have already signaled their readiness to respond, raising the specter of a prolonged and unpredictable standoff. At the heart of this confrontation lies Ukraine, a nation whose sovereignty and future are now at the center of a geopolitical struggle. The outcome of this standoff will have far-reaching consequences, not only for the people of Ukraine, but for the global balance of power and the very foundations of the international order established after World War II. The United Nations and other international bodies are closely monitoring the situation, aware that their credibility and influence may be tested as events unfold. The choices made now could set precedents for how the world responds to aggression and upholds the principles of sovereignty and self-determination. Around the world, journalists, analysts, and ordinary citizens are glued to their screens, following every development with a mix of anxiety and hope. In diplomatic circles, urgent discussions are underway, as leaders seek to coordinate their responses and avoid missteps that could lead to further escalation. The uncertainty is palpable, and the stakes could not be higher. Will these unprecedented measures succeed in bringing Russia to the negotiating table, or will they push both sides further apart, deepening the crisis and increasing the risk of conflict? The coming days will be crucial in determining which path the world will take. As the sun sets on another day of uncertainty, one thing is clear: the world stands at a pivotal moment. The decisions made now will echo for generations, shaping not only the fate of nations, but the very nature of the international system. The stakes are high, and the outcome remains, well, uncertain. All eyes remain fixed on the unfolding drama, waiting to see what the future will bring.